Hey, Lindsay, how are
Hi.
you?
Good, thanks.
Cool. So we're talking about perimenopause today. So we've sort of
Mhm.
skipped across into sort of more health kind of related
Mhm.
shifts that happen and then, create some sort of change for us as people.
Although I would definitely say that the health shifts also impact mental health rather
Totally.
significantly for
Well,
many.
this is a topic very close, I think, to both of our hearts,
Mm.
because it's certainly something I see in clinic. It's something I see all the time, with women that I work with, but also within myself going through this whilst trying to
Mm.
run a practice and do all the things. It's tricky balancing
Mm.
perimenopause and everything else. So let's just talk a little bit about just slightly. I mean, and neither of us are biologists or medically sort of trained as such, but I think we know enough about what perimenopause actually is. Let's just talk a little bit
Mm.
about that.
And I think one of the things I've noticed is people often aren't sure the interchange between menopause, perimenopause. So menopause is kind of the final. You have come to the end of your sort of ovarian cycles. That is stopped. But perimenopause is this almost strange sort of no man's land where changes start to happen,
Yeah.
but it can be quite erratic. So I heard the analogy used of it's not just like a light being with a dimmer switch being turned down gradually. It's like someone really messing with that dimmer switch. Sometimes it's up bright, sometimes it's down, sometimes in between. So it can be quite a time where there's a lot of fluctuation, a lot of unpredictability, which I think if this were a gradual transition, there would be a lot more predictability for people.
Yeah.
Whereas I think actually often it's the up down of some of the symptoms and some of the experiences that can make it a challenging time, much more so. And of
Yeah.
course, not everyone goes through menopause in that way. Sometimes it's a medical menopause. So people may have surgery and maybe sort of put straight into a much more sort of severe stage of changes in their bodies and their hormones. So there are various ways in which women enter perimenopause.
Yeah. And I'm just going
Mm.
to talk a little bit about, the kind of sort of shifts that happen. So, in essence, the way I've sort of understood it for myself is there are three estrogens that we sort of have in the body. Call them E1, E2, E3. So E1 is estrone, E2 is estradiol, and then estriol is a special one that we produce during pregnancy. So if we just take E1 and E2, estrone and estradiol, so the way I've sort of like thought about it is that obviously through childhood, your main estrogen is your estrone, and it's about 40% less potent than estradiol. So it's actually, it cruises around, it's doing what it needs to be doing, but it's not the same one that gets produced during our reproductive years. So when we start to move through puberty, estradiol sort of kicks in, and this is very, very important for brain maturation, myelination, emotional regulation, memory development. It's a very potent form of estrogen, and this is the one that falls and fluctuates, and the dial goes up and down during perimenopause. So it's not a nice little flick of the switch where it wires from one to the other. So in puberty, wiring in a way, we're more estradiol, and then as our ovaries start to fade in the light, it's sort of starting to kind of rely a little bit more on that E1 system again. But
Mhm.
um, this is not a clean cut kind of process, and
No.
this change is often it feels like the brain is lacking something or rewiring in a
Mm.
way. Some of the literature talks about this rewiring. That's not literally what is happening. It's kind of these fluctuations or shifting. And as this one is trying to kind of ramp up E1, this one is sort of ramping down, and progesterone is also affecting all of it. So all this fluctuating, it causes an absolute storm for us as
Yeah.
people. Absolute storm. Mm.
And there's a lot of, I guess, compensatory processes that try and then manage and cope with that fluctuation to keep us functioning. And it is the estrogen, but it's also progesterone that changes and becomes more erratic, and testosterone changes as well. So women do have testosterone, and that reduces during perimenopause as well. So we have multiple hormonal shifts that are occurring that tap into so many different systems in our body, both physiological systems that maybe produce more physical symptoms, but also things that may produce changes that are less visible, but perhaps more in terms of our thinking ability, our emotional resilience, and lots of other, processes that maybe are harder to have compassion for, because it might just look like a person is having a really bad day, or just suddenly be, having a personality change, rather than perhaps something that's more visible. I think it's easier for people to make sense of and frame it in the lens, hot flushes, let's say. It might be easier to make sense of the context in which that might be occurring.
For me, it was very interesting. I'll talk about my experience in a moment, and I'm sure you will do the same. But I remember as a kid, I didn't really know much about it. The only way I sort of knew about it, my mum was a school administrator, and there was a sort of back office at the school where it was a filing room that had an air conditioning system in it. And I remember visiting her sort of like 2 or 3 in the afternoon when all the kids had left already or whatever, and I couldn't find her. I opened up the filing room, and there she was with her shirt like this, with the air waving. And I was like, "What are you doing?" And she goes, "It's fine. It's just a hot flash." And I thought, this is very strange. And she was, "Yeah, it's just the menopause. It's just," and I'd never heard her talk about it. I had no idea. She was just, I think women, when I was growing up, were just quiet about it, and just suffer through it in some way, shape, or form. And I'm really encouraged by the fact that we're talking more about it, in this year and age. And because it can be really like traumatic to go through it. I mean, my personal situation, I had a tumor in my uterus, and I had to have a hysterectomy. And it was a kind of, I'd say, a more sudden move into, menopause. And I didn't have the nice indicator of a period to tell me when it's happening or when it's not happening. It was just sort of a little bit more sudden. And it was incredibly traumatic when it happened, because it just all of a sudden, all the symptoms all at the same time. And it just hit me like a ton of bricks. So I had to kind of make more of a plan in a way, because I think my worst symptom was the brain fog. That was really horrific. Just feeling like I couldn't get words out. I couldn't make sense of things, and I couldn't think straight. And of course, when you're in my profession, that's an absolute disaster.
Yeah, my path has been a more bog standard, just getting old journey. And I would say, probably with the benefit of hindsight, I would say a good 4 years, I've noticed perimenopausal symptoms. But the main thing that became a problem for me was really bad migraines, really bad headaches. And it was actually my partner that pointed out, this is way more than usual. I would get them anyway, as it's something that I experienced, but they were just thinking about that. And it was actually then when I started looking into that then I got a list of other indicators that were kind of, and I think I didn't, in myself, I didn't feel of an age where that would be a thing I would be needing to think about. I don't know. I think now sort of, 45 is the new 35 kind of thing. So I assumed it would happen to people that were older than I was, but I was well into my 40s, and noticed then other things that really made sense. And I do agree with you that I think narratives are now much more open. There's much more talking about it. I think there's much more of a willingness or openness to talk to partners about what you're experiencing. I work in a couple of different places, and they have menopause champions. They're really trying to promote and have an open dialogue around the impact and how to actually be helpful. And I guess, it might be quite difficult. Let's say you're a manager and you're a male, and you haven't got women in your life that have been through this process, yet you're expected to manage women going through sort of these changes. So I think that the education is much more thinking about how to be more supportive to women experiencing this, but also in the workplace, how to be more helpful to males that might be supporting people going through perimenopause. So yeah, definitely improvement, I think, in terms of the willingness to talk about it. And I would agree with you that my experience was, it just was something as growing up that the women in my life, the older women in my life, kind of just suffered through it fairly silently. I don't recall being particularly aware of them
No.
going through those stages.
No, it's kind
Mm.
of, well, maybe they just, courageous going through it in a way, but it just wasn't really discussed or talked about.
Mm.
I mean,
No.
my mother said to me that she did, take hormone replacement therapy, but it was very kind of hush hush and sort of ushered
Mhm.
along over there. And yeah, I said to her, well, what were your kind of symptoms? And she sort of explained. I thought, that's a lot of symptoms, Mum. Like,
Mm.
and she goes, yeah, but your father was aware. And so it was all this sort of very quiet, managed very
Mm.
in secret. And,
Mm.
now it's good that it's sort of more discussed because I think, this is also a time of our lives, this age that we're in, 40s, 50s, is sort of when we're expected to produce the most, be at the peak of our career, have kids, manage all the things, and to be going through this incredible fluctuation and
Mm.
change during that it's a tough ask. And I mean, if we said to a man, right, during your 40s and 50s, we're going to basically lob off your balls and, you just need to kind of at the peak of everything, just like keep performing and like
And
definitely
just hold
don't
it together.
just
Yeah.
hold it together. Like, don't go and be hysterical or be dramatic or anything. I think that would be a tough ask. They just wouldn't do it. They would have
No.
invented something by now. Like they wouldn't have put up with it.
And
Yeah.
you're right in terms of the timing of the transition, because people are perhaps more advanced, have more responsibility if they're working, might have children, but also parents are starting to get older. So people may be taking on more responsibilities for aging parents as well. So you really might be feeling that squeeze from, just when you need to be at your peak. You
Mm.
suddenly find these shifts that are occurring that just really can knock you off your feet. Yeah.
Well, and I think the point that you made earlier was really good, that it can happen a lot earlier than we think. I
Mm.
see it, I notice it with clients even as early as 37, 38.
Yeah.
For some of them start to experience symptoms. And if I look back, I definitely started having symptoms in my early 40s, that I didn't really understand what was
Mm.
going on. Just, I don't know, just restlessness and
Mhm.
perhaps a little bit more irritated or, just kind of wanting a change or something. I was sort of feeling anxious and
Mhm.
so these mood fluctuations, I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And then, definitely having migraines as well. I had the same and I couldn't really understand all that. But I think because my progression was more finite date, surgery, boom, like it was like, oh, okay, this is what it all is. I didn't notice looking back that all of
Mm.
that could have been perimenopause. But yeah, it can sneak up on people.
Definitely hard, I think, if it happens younger. I think that
Mm.
my experience occurred at a point in time where it became very accepted and quite obvious that that's probably the phase of life I was in. So I didn't have to fight too hard for it to be kind of, yeah, understood and accepted. But I questioned it a lot. So I had a child quite late in life, and I just thought perhaps I wasn't holding it together all that well, and just
It's
not
incredible how
coping
we
all that well.
personalize this
You
stuff.
really
Yeah,
took it inwards
yeah.
on maybe, how do people do this and stay functioning and do all the things that we need to do. So I think that certainly my own experience, initially I was thinking it was me not coping all that well.
Mm.
I mean, I was functioning well enough, but it really did feel like I was fraying at the edges. Things were becoming a lot harder, and I think it really sapped whatever capacity there was left to have the energy for fun and for enjoying life and for relaxing. So my sleep was definitely impacted. So sleep can be
Mm.
a real thing for people, both
Big time.
difficulty getting to sleep, staying asleep in the night. If you throw into the mix maybe hot flushes and the chills, the different things that can disrupt sleep throughout the night, but also early morning waking. And
Yeah.
it's this cruel thing when you might already be really quite tired, that then you find yourself having this night's sleep where you think, I'm trying to do all the things You know,
Mm.
if one more person spoke to me about sleep hygiene, might throw something at them. It was, this doesn't feel like something I can do. This feels incredibly organic, and it's happening to me, rather than choices about, good sleep practice. And so then that just sets you up for a sort of a cycle that then already puts you on the back foot for the rest of the day. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard. And I think, estradiol being so much more potent than estrone, it controls so many systems within the brain.
Mm,
I mean, it governs mood, reward, it interacts, I mean, with serotonin, dopamine, noradrenaline. So your mood, your motivation, your pleasure, your arousal all gets impacted. Then it modulates GABA, which deals with all your calm and excitation,
mm,
and glutamate as well. It also regulates that. So your entire excitatory
yeah.
neurotransmitters is also modulated by estradiol. Then you've got sleep and temperature and
Mhm.
thermoregulation also gets modulated by estradiol. And then you've got stress and memory. So
Yeah.
I'm kind of like, it's interesting that more of the symptoms are actually neurological rather than just straight in the body. They're actually
Yes.
governed by the brain. So people change, your personality changes, and you change how you experience life. And I don't know, I think perhaps, after a few years, I've had a few years now of, I suppose, menopause, post-menopause, or whatever we want to call it. I mean, I'm still going through a lot of sort of changes and fluctuations, but it's definitely, it hardens you like in some ways. Like I feel a little bit hardened, a little bit wiser, perhaps a little bit more calm. I think feels like the storm has calmed, like I got to the
Mhm.
center of the hurricane or whatever, or I got to the end of the storm of it. And I think perhaps this is where, a lot of women talk about post-menopause years as their best years ever. So I'm kind of like,
Yeah.
okay, maybe we're heading in that direction now. It's quite cool, but the storm
I
is
mean, I'm
horrific
very
for
pleased
people.
for you that you're heading in that way, but there's a part of me going,
Heading
no, I'm in the storm, desperately clinging onto sort of like a pole
all
for
the
dear
things,
life,
all the
hoping
things.
for that postmenopausal euphoria. Just hang on in there. It's coming.
I see a glimpse at the end of the tunnel. I'm like, there it is. We're heading there. That's good. But yeah, it's I think the storm is really, really difficult for people. And I mean, I think particularly when I work with couples
Yeah.
and I see that the big shifts in marriage tend to coincide with perimenopausal shifts. And the husband doesn't understand it, and the wife is like trying to cope and struggling to explain it. And I think more men really need to kind of, be there for their wives and partners. If you're in a heteronormative relationship, to kind of really understand what is going on. And even, I think women understand more. I think women that are in same-sex relationships are more compassionate about the stuff, but men could really do with some understanding because it's difficult for them. I mean, imagine your wife just suddenly gets hijacked and is changing. I mean, scary for you because you don't understand. And I think when you lean into it and like, hey, what do you need and what support do you require and like, how can I help with this? That can be a lifeline for a woman
Mhm.
going through this experience. Mm.
And I think it requires both parties to have some awareness and recognition that that's what it is. I had an experience where, so one of the things I've been experiencing is just being incredibly irritable, like really irritated. And I've never, I mean, we've known each other a long time. I'm not a particularly angry person. I don't get irritable very easily, and everything and everyone was really driving me crazy. And my partner said to me in the midst, I think I was going on about something, and I really was quite cross. I couldn't tell you what about, probably not a lot, but I was just feeling super cross and super right in my crossness. And he just looked at me and went, "What is going on with you?" So initially I was like, "Don't you gaslight me?" And I was really didn't respond. And then I stepped away and I had a moment of like, huh, what's more likely that suddenly everyone and everything around me is pushing my buttons and driving me crazy? Or maybe I am the common denominator and something has
Mm.
shifted within me. So I think that it requires both sides to have some ability to recognize this feels outside of the normal parameters. So whatever a person's normal range of responding to situations, or different experiences that they may be having that are linked to perimenopause, what's outside of the norm, and how do we start to then recognize when that might be something different? Because I do agree with you that for partners, it must be very confusing to suddenly feel like you're in a relationship with a person who has changed in some way or is responding to you differently. There may be shifts in the sexual aspects of the relationship, and I think that how we recognize that this is not necessarily because the relationship is no longer working, but actually the one half of that relationship is going through a transition that requires both sides to have some awareness of what is going on and how to adjust to that. But I think you're right that the storm that individuals experience then also plays out within, whether that's intimate relationships or close relationships in other ways. It really does, have a strong bearing on how
And I
we then
think
relate to others.
when you're going through a transition like this, it's important to be aware of the symptoms, and even for,
Mm,
partners to be aware of the symptoms. I mean, there's obviously the changes in your cycle, so
mhm.
heavier bleeding, perhaps
Or
spotting,
lighter, yeah, yeah.
migraines,
Hmm.
they kind of come with that. The vasomotor functions because of the way estrogen modulates the thermostat within the brain. So hot flashes, night sweats, palpitations, temperature sensitivity, sleep. 100%.
Absolutely, yeah.
I'm still not quite right on sleep.
Mhm,
Difficulty falling asleep, or falling asleep really fast and waking repeatedly, exhaustion, restless legs,
mhm,
mood, nervous system because of the way estrogen
mhm,
modulates all the neurotransmitters. Irritability definitely can relate to that. Rage, loss of confidence, cognition.
mhm.
Scary. I think this is scary.
The word finding.
Oh my
The
God, the
number of
word
times I've walked
finding.
into a room and if you'd given me £1 million, I could not have remembered
Yeah,
why I walked into the room. And I was such, and I think there's a real loss of confidence or a change in identity. Whatever your experience is of yourself, there is a real adjustment, I think, in the perimenopause period. So I've always been able to very much rely on my brain, on my word finding ability, and
totally.
and my cognitive skills. So to suddenly feel like they're just not there in the same way has been a real adjustment, a real sense in shifting of identity. But equally, there are other changes, body composition changes, fat distribution changes. So if your identity is centered around having experienced yourself for decades as someone who has a very lean body or a very healthy body and really work at that, and then suddenly it's changing, that's a real shift in identity. So I think that there are so many ways in which the transition can really shake your sense of who you are. If you see yourself as a very calm and compassionate person, suddenly you may find yourself filled with so much more rage than you are used to experiencing in yourself. And that's adjustment for you and for the people around
And
you.
I think as well, you can suddenly fully present with all the symptoms of ADHD. And I think
Mhm,
that's why sometimes ADHD can get diagnosed so commonly during a perimenopausal phase. Now, it doesn't mean it's confused with perimenopause. Like sometimes you could be masking the symptoms for
mhm.
years, and then it's just too much when you go through
Yeah.
this rewiring phase. Or similarly, it could also not quite be ADHD. And actually, when you postmenopausal, you might find all the ADHD type symptoms disappear. But I mean, I had several weeks where my poor husband would literally be like, I'm literally following you, trying to switch off the stove, make sure the oven is off. Do you know that you left your phone in the fridge yesterday? And I was just like, sorry, I don't know. It was just standing at the fridge, put the phone down, and then close it. I've lost the phone. The phone's ringing. We can't hear it. I don't know where it is. And I felt like I was going crazy, like completely
Mm.
crazy. And foggy, so foggy, couldn't remember things, and that sharpness wasn't there, and that was terrifying.
And it's terrifying and it's so confusing and costs so much time. if you imagine if you have to repeat and do over things so many times, or you've lost things, or can't remember where you put some, the amount of time I've spent doing things again, or having to recheck something, or just it's yeah, it's a scary amount of time that I think that I
Yeah.
lose in just trying to keep up with myself. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we can all relate to what that actually feels like. And I think it can really feel like a psychological crisis for some people. I think the buffer, because of the life pressures of aging parents, adolescent children, caring responsibilities, whatever it is that we're doing, we start to get squeezed, and that buffer that we usually have just thins like this, and there's just less tolerance for everything.
Mhm.
And this altering state within our body, altering sleep, being sleep deprived whilst this buffer is thinning. I mean, some people can have a real psychological crisis, and I think there were definitely days where I'd just be collapsed in a heap, sobbing, just thinking, I
Mhm.
just can't function right now. So it's really, really terrifying, and I am heartened by the shifts that are starting to happen. But there's really just some doctors just don't get it still. You'll go in and they'll do a blood test and say, no, man, you've got another 10 years to wait. Nothing to see here. And I'm just like, the science doesn't say you should look at the blood test. The science says you should look at the symptom list. And I think that's one of the most important things to think about
Yeah.
is this fluctuation. A blood test is only a baseline at a single point in time. It doesn't tell you the picture of what is actually happening for you. And I think if you took a diary of all of your symptoms and actually just took that to the doctor, there's a very good case to actually, do something about it. Whether you go on hormone replacement therapy or whatever. We'll talk about that more in our next episode. But it's, whatever the thing is to not allow the medical establishments to gaslight you. This shift is real, and it's not something that can be brushed away with, oh well, just have an antidepressant, you'll be okay. And it's like,
Mhm.
no, yeah, it frustrates me when doctors don't quite know enough about this still. Mm.
Agreed. And I think the point you make about an antidepressant is how hard it is when so much of one type of experience may overlap with other things. So, if you are coming into perimenopause with pre-existing challenges around sort of feeling anxious or feeling depressed, or have trauma in your history, or eating difficulties, if you're coming with other things, think about how much that can get exacerbated by then you throw in all of these extra changes on top of that. So I think that whilst absolutely we want our clinicians that are seeing people to be skillful in picking up on what they're hearing, because some people, now with access to the internet, we can go away and research things, but not everyone may make those connections, especially if it happens earlier in life. So someone may be going along talking about other things, and it's, I guess, just having it on the radar, of how to sort of spot. And it may be that other interventions or treatments may be appropriate as well. But I guess it's just not having things discounted. I think that can feel like such a wound on top of what is already a challenging time, to then not feel validated or listened to. That is particularly hard.
And I think though, if you go to a doctor and that medical encounter is sort of making you feel gaslit or powerless at the moment. You're told you're too young, your blood tests are normal, it's just anxiety. You just need to eat less, move more. It's just part of aging. Just basically you're overreacting.
Mhm.
That can make the person's psychological crisis even more acute. And
Mhm.
we've got to remember, and I mean, I actually looked this up. I was curious about medical training, how much actual menopausal training do they get? It's like half a day, an
Mm.
entire course of training. And that, I mean, it fluctuates per country. And I think some people are sort of attending more seminars and more things about it. It's seen as an adjacent piece of training. So if a medical
Yeah.
doctor goes and gets this training, they have to go out and go and get it.
Mhm.
It's not part of the classic MB CHB program. So it is interesting, and that's got to shift. I mean, it's interesting
Mm.
that that's the case. So you're kind of rolling the dice a little bit when you go to your medical doctor as to whether they've done the extra thing or they're aware. And so not allowing that to cast light on your reality
Mm.
and actually take yourself and your symptoms seriously. If you don't feel quite right and your doctor says you're just overreacting, go find another doctor. Before you decide that
Yeah.
you agree with that person, actually just first check to see if you can get a second opinion.
Mm.
Mm.
And I don't think it's just our medical professionals that really need to be able to pick up on some of those. If someone comes in with a very clear list on their research and present it in that way, that's one thing. But for the people that perhaps haven't joined up the dots, but it's not just medical professionals, thinking about psychological professionals as well. We talked today about how much of an impact it can have on a sense of self, how much it can exacerbate other difficulties. It may be that someone doesn't present to a medical professional with those difficulties. They may be seeing someone, either a therapist or a psychologist, and just thinking about how people are also clued up in how they're formulating and making sense of what someone's experiencing, and being able to think, actually, do we need to think about some of the more physiological, more biological transitions that may be occurring for this person? So it's factored in a multifaceted way from lots of different professionals that support people at this time of
And
life.
that's so right. I mean, I think I read a systematic review in the 2024 one that was talking about like people that get misdiagnosed with PTSD when actually they've got kind of menopausal symptom burden that has happened at the same time that they experience trauma. So
Mhm.
trauma and perimenopause can overlap with so much of the symptoms. It can literally
Mhm.
the cognitive symptoms, the palpitations, the sweating, the hyperarousal, the loss of bodily control, and that decrease in regulatory capacity are often, they're part of the PTSD sort of milieu symptoms. And I think you're quite right. If people are not psychologists and mental health workers are not aware of the symptom overlap, then they might not be supporting their clients and patients to be seeking the right kind of, treatment protocols for what's actually
Mm.
going on. Because if you're going through a live trauma and you've got this rewiring happening at the same time, perimenopause exacerbates everything.
Yeah.
It makes everything 10 times more difficult. So if you're ADHD 10 times more difficult. Trauma, 10 times more difficult. You're going through a divorce, 10 times more difficult. You lost your job, 10 times more difficult. So it's just understanding that and really having
Mm.
self-compassion. It's like, it's okay. I can't be myself at this time. Like if I'm not handling this how I think I should, it's because I'm not
Mhm.
me when my hormones are completely rewiring. Mm.
Mm. And I guess if I think about my own practice now, it's so much on my radar. It's very easy to have conversations, or at least to ask the questions and start to think about whether that's something to factor in. Me 15 years ago, it probably wouldn't have been as present in my mind, or as much of a thing for me to ask about, or to even think to ask about in the same way. So I think also we're talking about the training that medical professionals receive, also psychological practitioners. And actually in the university there's someone doing a research project that I'm supervising that is very much looking at that. What training do psychologists receive in making sense of this? And so I think across the board we're trying to think about how people understand their symptoms, how workplaces support people going through perimenopause, how professionals of all different disciplines are better able to spot and factor in and support people going through perimenopause. So it's a good direction of travel, but it does feel like it's been a long time coming. So yeah,
I
it's
do
it's
have to think if this was happening to men, they would have found like a perfect little pill by now to just sort all the things. I
well.
do wonder, because there's just so little research. When you look at the research, I mean, there's some fantastic researchers out there that are doing some really epic work now, but there
Mhm.
just has been so little research in it. For
And I think
example,
what's
I've,
surprising that if for anyone who is born with ovaries, you will go through
yeah.
perimenopause and menopause. If you think how many people that is, there is a real mismatch in the amount of
There is a
research that has been done
mismatch.
into it.
I mean, for
Yeah.
example, I read a study a few weeks ago was talking about the musculoskeletal symptoms
Mhm.
of menopause. And I was just, of course, because I suddenly had all these joint pains, like
Mhm.
incredible joint pain. And it was like, I thought, okay, well, I need ibuprofen. I need to go see an orthopedic person. Like, so spent thousands going down that rabbit hole for years, like
Mhm.
trying to go and find, all the orthopedic people. Why is the joint scans and MRIs and no, we don't see anything. It must be all in your head. And it's just like, here's this paper, and I'm like, duh. So irritating, and it's like it's just an emerging field now. It's just
Mhm.
starting. It could have just explained all of the weirdness
Mhm.
that we've all been through for the last decade or whatever. So I think I'm encouraged that it's beginning, but it's such a
Yeah.
shame that it's taken so long.
I'm glad though. As
Yeah,
much as I wish more, being where I am now, I wish that we were further along with understanding, this experience.
yeah,
But I have to be glad for all future people that go through perimenopause. I nearly called it merry penopause then, which, we're talking about word finding, nothing merry about it. um,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
hopeful that
Hopeful.
yeah, future generations will have a different experience, or at least a different insight and awareness in the systems around them.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. So
Mm.
in the next episode, we'll talk about what, we've done about
Mm.
it and just the protocols that we follow and what some of the research and stuff that's out there about it. So, and definitely, what are some of the kind of newer things that people are sharing in the research. So we'll talk
Mm.
more about that next time when we continue talking about all things health, relationships, and trauma. Till then.
Right.
The information shared on the Naked Insights podcast is for educational and information purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for professional therapy or counseling. While we aim to provide helpful and accurate insights, individual experiences may vary. If you're experiencing trauma, mental health issues, or distress, please seek guidance from a qualified professional. The views expressed by us as the hosts are our own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions or positions of any affiliated organizations.